Okay. My apologies that we have to do this. I was hoping the PowerPoint would work. We've tried on it all weekend, couldn't do it, so now we're gonna have to do a YouTube video. So now, not only do you have to listen to me, you have to watch me, you have to see me. And of course, you know, years ago, took away this class's 20 donuts, ate them all, and so I am the way I am right now. But anyhow, let's get started. So we're talking about the Second Great Awakening, Transcendentalism, the women's movement, abolition. All these things are going to be part of the Second Great Awakening. Your goal is, when you're done with this, to be able to compare and contrast the Second Great Awakening with the First Great Awakening. Believe it or not, my first year teaching AP US, that was the LEQ. Some were ready for it, some weren't. So of course we're looking at reform movements, evaluate religion, debate over slavery and things like that. So the big thing you need to know, and I would do this as a list, the Second Great Awakening, 1800 to 1850. So you would say turn of the century. You would say the First Great Awakening is the 1700s, right as we get here, and then even before the American Revolution. And then the Second Great Awakening is the turn of the century. And of course, it's going to lead to reforms. It's going to be a religious movement led by Reverend Finney, but also these reforms. So underneath led to reforms, I would put religious movement. Then number 2, revivalism, which is part of religious movement if you want to combine them. Abolition, prison reform, mental health reform, temperance. Of course, temperance is wanting to do without alcohol, or at least temper where you don't drink as much alcohol. Women's rights, transcendentalism, which is kind of one within itself, being comfortable within yourself, and then utopian communities. Now, the word utopia means perfect. Think of socialism on steroids. Utopia would work. The problem is, as you get more and more people into it, it's not going to work because you get different personalities. Small utopias could work because you could have, you know, a group of 10, 12 people with one vision and everybody working hard, good work ethic. But as time goes on, you're not going to have it. So of course, the revivalism part, that's going to be huge, just like in the First Great Awakening. What can we do to get to where we need to be? Some people feel that religion has gotten soft, it's gotten stale. Revivalism is all about bringing the spiritual back. If you can look at this political cartoon, of course you got people falling out, laying on the ground, things like that. And so that's what revival is. Revival means to kind of like a rebirth, almost like a renaissance when you're doing that. And of course, Charles G. Finney is the person associated with the Second Great Awakening. First Great Awakening, you would say George Whitefield and Jonathan Edwards. Finney would be this one. Of course, he is a revivalist preacher. He does believe in all these reforms. He goes around and preaches not only revival, but that you should do equality to man and woman. Later on, he becomes president of Oberlin College in Ohio, and it is one of the first schools in America that accepts people without looking at their sex, race, or religion, whereas all other schools had looked at that. They were open to anybody, and so that shows you where he stands on that. Also a really great revivalist. It's during this time, I think he's Presbyterian. It is during this time, the Second Great Awakening, we have a lot more denominations open up. Whereas the First Great Awakening, we have the Presbyterians, the Christians, Puritans. During this one, you're going to have a lot of different denominations open up. So let's talk about the different reform movements. First, education. You need to know Horace Mann, and he is going to be the first Secretary of Education in Massachusetts. It is going to be a public education. Before that, you either paid, you went to a private school, you had tutors come in. They're going to set up schools for kids to go to, very similar to what we have. To do that, he knew that you were going to have more teachers, more schools, more students, more teachers. So he's going to set up something to train teachers with that. And then the third thing, and I would just do this as a list as well, is curriculum reforms. So instead of the teacher deciding what to teach, he would decide what everybody's going to teach in the state of Massachusetts, we have curriculums today. The state tells me what I should and shouldn't teach. Or they don't say what I shouldn't teach, what I should teach. When it comes to mental health, Dorothea Dix writes for the mentally ill. And then, of course, also prison reform. Now, going back to mentally ill, she is the one that says that people can be cured, they can be helped. Whereas back in the day, if you were deemed mentally ill, they just threw you in a room, or you were the village idiot. I mean, that's really how they looked at it. She thought that things could be done to help them through some training. Hospitals did have asylums at that time, but the asylums, they were trying to train you to do things to control your anger, your fears, your anxieties, things like that. And then also with prison reform, because she's going to think about anybody can be rehabilitated. And of course, back in the day, we had Dorothea Dix Hospital right there in Raleigh. Today, it is a park. Believe it or not, it was so old, Dorothea Dix actually came, and of course she dies in 1887, but she comes for the opening of Dorothea Dix Hospital. Prison reforms, change in penal institutions. So what are we going to do with prisons? You know, back in the day, it was just, put them out in the stocks, whip them. Here, there's a water torture that's going on to punish them and stuff. So what we're going to do, and of course it's nothing compared to what we have today, but for that time it was very advanced. But we're going to do rehabilitation. What can we do to make this person a contributing member of society? And that's what they're going to look at. So we're going to get away from this, more into what can we do to fix this person, put them back so they can become productive members of society. The rehabilitation idea is punishment should be used to reform the imprisoned so they may re-enter society, productive citizens. We have it today. Today you can get your high school diploma, you can get a college diploma, you can learn a trade. All these are things that we have in prisons today, and it all started back in the day with prison reform during the turn of the century, the 1800s. Now, we still had some bad prisons, don't get me wrong, but we're making changes with it. Abolitionist movement. Of course, we've talked about that before. That is the end of slavery. It is getting more and more popular. Of course, you would reference Harriet Beecher Stowe's Uncle Tom's Cabin, converts a lot of people to abolitionism. The Quakers of Pennsylvania, Greensboro, North Carolina, are all love your brother, don't have anybody into slavery. And so that's going to become huge. We were talking about some newspapers that are abolitionist newspapers. And keep in mind during this time period, this is what we call the antebellum South. Antebellum is the term for anything that happens basically 1800 to the Civil War. Stonewall Manor is an antebellum house. It is built in 1830, and so you know the deal with that. All right, so a couple of the newspapers that take place. William Lloyd Garrison is the leading northern white abolitionist. And of course, he comes out with this newspaper called The Liberator. He is the editor, publisher, writer, gets all these things together. And what he is going to do in his Liberator is he is going to tell about stories that take place, stories that get back to him about how slaves are treated down south. And the North. Keep in mind, we have a lot of northern states early in the 1800s that still have slavery. Delaware has it until the end of the Civil War. Washington, D.C. has slavery. Those other states like New York and those are going to have slavery. They outlaw the slave trade, but if you're already a slave, they're going to keep slavery there. So in here, he'll talk about atrocities associated with slavery down in the South. The Grimke sisters, and yes, they are sisters. Both of them get married, which proves that there is someone for everyone. They actually, I got to give them credit. They are brought up on a South Carolina plantation, but they see the horrors of slavery, and that makes them sick. They don't like it. They go against their mom and dad. They start talking about how slavery is wrong. The treatment of slaves is wrong. They go around South Carolina and tell people slavery is wrong. They are so adamant about it that they are actually exiled from the South. So then they go up north and become advocates up there. So that's pretty dedicated when you go against your parents and stuff, because you see what's taking place on the plantation that you're growing up on. And don't worry, they'll never ask, like, this one sister did this and the other one didn't do anything. Usually they will refer to one of them or both of them as the Grimke sisters, and you just need to know they were abolitionists who were born in the South. David Walker, a free black, who writes a book called The Appeal, or work, Appeal to the Colored Citizens of the World. And basically what he is doing, he is encouraging slave revolts. He tells them to fight for their freedom and says, look, we can't be those people who sit around singing spirituals and hoping that God will one day deliver us. He says you must go ahead and go out and take care of this now. So he is advocating violence on part of the slaves. The one thing I'd like to point out, David Walker is a free man in the North. So it's kind of, at least Nat Turner went out and said, I'm a slave, I'm revolting, I'm leading this revolt. David Walker never led a revolt. He just told people that they should revolt from the North. But still, that's pretty important to do that. If you see here, he says, therefore, if there is an attempt made by us, kill or be killed, and believe this, that it is no more harm for you to kill a man who is trying to kill you than it is for you to take a drink of water when thirsty. So he is saying, don't worry about the violence. It is justified. Nat Turner felt that the violence was justified. So all these slave rebellions are kind of in the same boat. And to be honest, they are justified based on the treatment they are receiving. Frederick Douglass, now he was a former slave. He escapes on a train, has some identification as a free black as somebody else's, doesn't meet the description. He's almost found out, but fortunately he's able to get away with it. But what he does is he creates this newspaper, called the North Star. He is the publisher, writer, all that, and what he does, once again, is advocates for emancipation of the slaves. He, once again, talks about the atrocities that takes place. One of the things he's trying to do here is to encourage whites to come and help the slaves. Lloyd Garrison does that too, but help the slaves and what is going on down in the South. He is at least speaking from experience, Frederick Douglass. Now, temperance is basically when you are going to do away with alcohol, or at least cut down on it. And of course, temperance and the women's rights movement are always intertwined, because who do you think wants temperance the most? It is the women. Why do women want it the most? Because they are the wives at home. Husband is working all day, and when he comes home, he's mad about his day. He goes out to drink, and when he comes back, he's drunk. He's even more angrier about his life. Beats the woman, hits the kids, doesn't put money into the house. He is using this money at the bar or just buying corn liquor. And so temperance is encouraging moderation in the consumption of these liquors and stuff. They would love to have complete abstinence, but they know that is not, realistic. So you do need to know this poster, and this is the Drunkard's Progress. And it shows that as a man starts out, he's a teetotaler, maybe one drink a day, and then he starts hanging out in the bars and saloons. And then, of course, it just gets worse and worse. Up here, he is a certified drunkard. And then, of course, once you go past that step, you drink more and more, he becomes a wino, an alcoholic. And then he becomes almost a pauper, having very little money, loses his job probably, resorts to theft to get money, just like our drug addicts today. And then, of course, may end up committing suicide. And then underneath all this is the woman and the child who are left penniless and maybe even homeless after dad has spent all the money. So these are your different steps as it goes by that. The next two are also political cartoons you need to know. This one is the tree of intemperance, not temperance, but intemperance. That means people who do drink a lot. If you look, the roots have types of alcohol, gin, whiskey, brandy. It leads to the trunk of intemperance, and then you see the branches have no leaves on them. They are bare branches, because that's what you get when you drink. And if you look, it'll have descriptive terms, violence, disaffection, not infection, sorry. Other things that are associated with someone who drinks alcohol all the time. Whereas this is the tree of temperance. So your roots are squarely in the ground, you have your trunk of temperance, you have leaves, you have fruit, and of course the adjectives here are adjectives of good: sobriety, education, love, affection, all those things. If you look back here in the back, all the people associated here are drunkards, people that are homeless, jobless, whereas here you got church, you got the school, you got everybody getting along well together. So I would know all three of those posters associated with temperance. Now, Lucretia Mott, once again, another lady who is happily married, is a prominent abolitionist and women's rights activist. So now they're all going to meet at Seneca Falls, that's up in New York, and they're going to have a women's association meeting. She is going to be one of the leaders. So one of the things to keep in mind is the women of the time, Second Great Awakening, are looking for women's suffrage, abolition, and temperance. To be quite honest, of those three, women's suffrage is going to be the third on the list. They actually want to fight, and you're going to see this, they're going to fight for abolition first, the freeing of the slaves. Temperance is second, and then their own suffrage is third, and that is why they don't get it for almost 100 more years, 1919, 1920. The other lady that's with her is Elizabeth Cady Stanton, another abolitionist, women's rights leader. I don't know why I didn't underline this. All of that should be underlined as well. But they're both going to be the leaders at the Seneca Falls Convention. And that takes place in 1848. So you look at it, it's not until 1919 that they get suffrage. But they do get abolition. Prohibition does take place in the 1900s. They don't get it, but they do make headway with it. So the Seneca Falls Convention, 1848, up in New York. And what the women do is they write a document called the Declaration of Rights and Sentiments. And basically what it is going to talk about is women's rights. Now they're going to borrow from the Declaration of Independence. And if you look, there's where Seneca Falls is, the ladies get up. Frederick Douglass is there. There are men there. If you look at this, these are men that attended, but you can see more females at this. But as I said, they are going to draw from the Declaration of Independence, and I would click on this image to, can't remember, I have a video or some extra stuff there. So if you look at it, this of course is the Declaration of Independence. All men and women were created equal. They're going to take it from that, and they're just going to add in women. So we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men and women are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with a certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Word for word from the Declaration of Independence, except the fact that they're going to add women to it. You can't blame them though. That's how it goes. Susan B. Anthony, probably of the three, the most well-known, because we do a $1 silver dollar for her later on in American history. If you look at it, this one's 1999, so that's not too far back. And she's one of the first female rights activists there, and she is firmly committed to female suffrage. She actually may be a little bit more female suffrage than abolition. These two ladies, Lucretia and Elizabeth, are women's rights, but they really want abolition. They actually go over to Europe and talk about abolition, how to help out. Sojourner Truth is a runaway slave. Of course, she's got a lot of dog in the fight there, that she wants to have freedom as a black woman or as a African American. And then, of course, equality as a female. So she is looking for both. She travels around the nation, mainly the North, we all know that, to talk about the abolition of slaves and equality for women. That brings us to our utopian communities. As I said, this is communities where people live together, they work together, they are isolated from others, they are like-minded people, and it's a little bit like socialism where everybody divides everything up, everybody eats, but everybody works. And if you can get a small group to do that, that works out really well. The problem is as you become larger and larger, you start to find some people who don't want to work as much as the other people. And that's where the utopians start to fray and then fall apart. But they're looking to create better societies. All right? They are trying to be the perfect society, you know, the city upon the hill deal. And so, now these are mainly going to be up north. You wouldn't find these down south at all. You'd mainly find them up north. So this is New Harmony in Indiana. Robert Owen, and he's probably one of the best known utopians. But as you look, it looks like a little fort to keep everybody out, us in for protection. They got some farmland that everybody would have to go out and farm and all that stuff. But everybody shares everything. If you look here, everybody's eating. This is probably on a Sunday. Everybody's dressed very similar. You know, you don't have the different classes of people. It's just people. We are who we are. And that's what they're looking at there. So they probably had a big community meal. All the women helped cook it. All the men were doing things. Probably, to be honest with you, the men were probably playing horseshoes or something. Or quoits at the time. They didn't have horseshoes quite yet. Oneida, New York is another one, 1848. But look at this, a little bit different. Free love, birth control, and eugenic selection of parents. So everybody's in this same building. And yes, the free love, I'm glad you're not here to discuss this. You would have different partners from time to time. And eugenic selection means this. No one was really married to each other. We were all just part of this group, this community. But we do need to, in their minds, reproduce. So what we will do is we will get this tall guy with this tall, good-looking woman and let them consummate to produce a child that should look like them. It is a little bit like Hitler back in the days. You know, Hitler wanted blonde hair, blue eyes, tall guys, exactly what he wasn't. So that's what they're looking at. Let's find folks that will make perfect children and let them procreate. The Brook Farm Utopia in Boston. And of course, one of the things that's going to happen with these utopias is they're going to bring in Transcendentalism, which we'll talk about in just a second. So now, another little thing about this time period is the architecture, neoclassical architecture. So we got Jefferson's Monticello. Keep in mind, Monticello is an Italian word for little mountain, I think. Not big mountain, little mountain. But if you look, it has the columns, the frieze, the dome, like you would see in Roman and Greek architecture. As a matter of fact, this is what you see on the back of the nickel. It is the backyard of Jefferson. The front door is on the other side, but it's very, very short. This is a big area, not quite as big as a football field, but pretty big, beautiful grass, and then all around, kind of in a horseshoe, are flowers and bushes and things like that Jefferson was really into. He'd take painstaking notes about it. So we're going to talk a little bit about some literature of the time. Keep in mind, until this period, the Second Great Awakening, we are basically just reading books from England. Charles Dickens is the main guy that we're reading his books over here. And now what's going to happen is we're going to have American authors talk about American stories. So that becomes popular over here, and then it becomes popular over in Europe. And then, of course, when it becomes popular in Europe, that is once again going to lead to immigration coming to America. So the first one, Noah Webster, doesn't write a novel. He writes a dictionary, but he wants to help improve the conditions of education. And one of the things he says we need to do is to standardize the English language. So keep in mind, in the 1770s, how we had words that were spelled different than they are today. Because people spelled them different, kind of where you were from, what part of England you were from, what part of Ireland you were from. And so he's going to come in and standardize the English language, which he does with the dictionary. We're going to have schools, the Hudson River School of Artists. And it's the first school of American art. And one of the big things they're going to do is landscapes to show off the beauty of America. And that's going to be huge. And once again, some of those paintings go over to Europe. It acts as propaganda because now people will see the beauty of America and want to come over here. If you look, all that are landscapes by that students at that school. All right, we have, and look, they wouldn't have called it the New Nationalists back then. It's the Knickerbocker School, but New National. Nationalism at the time means I'm proud to be an American. Nativist, yes, means I'm anti-immigrant, but nationalism means I'm just proud to be an American. So we're going to talk about some national culture coming through. As we said, this is going to be in the books. People are going to read it here, and then, of course, it's going to go over to Europe. James Fenimore Cooper and Washington Irving are going to be two of the most important ones. Washington Irving, you may remember him from The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. He shows things from an American point of view. And of course, these are set up in New England Village. And he is the first American to be respected by Europeans because of how well he writes. And here's a little interesting thing. If you know the story of The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, okay, you know the main character, probably Ichabod Crane. And I'll ask you this and see if you can tell me. Is he a protagonist or an antagonist? And see if you can figure that out and let me know. So I would click on this link as well on the PowerPoint being folder 4, and learn just a little bit about The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. Edgar Allan Poe, of course, the horror genre, short stories, poems. He is from Baltimore, Maryland, goes to school for a while at UVA. They still have his dorm room there. Got plexiglass at the door so you can look in and see. It's very tiny room. But he was only there for a year. He drops out. I think he goes, I'd have to look and see where he goes. Something made me think he went to West Point, but I'm not sure. I don't think so. But again, once again, he goes through. He has real bad luck with everyone associated with him dies. He has people who have suicide. He carries an infectious disease that he gets married and moves in with his wife and mother-in-law. They both die from the infectious disease he has, and then finally he dies from it. And once again, check on the link there. James Fenimore Cooper is one of my favorite books, The Last of the Mohicans. This is of course, he wrote stories about American frontier going out west, which is the western part of North Carolina, Virginia, all that. So The Last of the Mohicans is set in the mountains of North Carolina during the French and Indian War. And what's basically it's about is there's this British general out there, and the French and the Indians are fighting. This general has this great idea to bring his 2 daughters out there. I don't know why.